He's there in the center of their perfect lobby, uninvited in their minds despite the account in his name, a black man whose quiet is mistaken for weakness. Every question at the counter sharpens to accusation, every glance from staff judges and condemns before he can speak. They see the hoodie, the tired sneakers, and decide the story without asking for a single fact. But beneath that calm sits a secret they can't imagine, the authority to drain billions from their vaults with a single word. Today isn't about service or courtesy. It's about the price of presuming someone's worth by what they wear and the ruin that follows when you underestimate the wrong man. Stick around for the full story. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your thoughts and where you're watching from. This is the kind of truth meant to be told everywhere. His baggy jeans were 2 shades lighter at the knees from wear, cinched at the waist with a cracked leather belt. His sneakers, old and scuffed, bore the flattened heels of miles walked because he couldn't afford a car anymore. He scanned the lobby out of habit, assessing it the way a man learned to when he was used to being watched. An empty row of bolted plastic chairs along one wall, a long counter with 3 teller stations, one of them occupied by a young woman tapping idly at her keyboard. Near the door, leaning against the wall, stood the security guard. The man was built thick through the shoulders, arms crossed over his chest, sunglasses worn indoors in a way that told you he liked the way it made people nervous. Marlon watched the guard push off the wall slowly, shift his stance, one hand dropping to thumb the radio on his belt. The crackle was unmistakable. "Manager, I've got a suspicious individual at the door. Might be casing a place," the guard muttered, pretending to speak low, but the words carried in the quiet. Marlon's jaw worked for a second, the papers in his hand crumpling slightly as he reflexively squeezed them. He exhaled, eyes flicking away to hide the flare of embarrassment. Throat tight with old rage he wouldn't let loose. He kept walking, measured, deliberate steps on the cold floor that squeaked under worn soles, like his shoes were determined to betray how out of place he was. He kept his head down but watched from the corner of his eye as the lone customer in the waiting area, a woman in a tailored skirt suit, raised her head from her phone and wrinkled her nose before turning away quickly, her expression shuddering into blankness. He stepped up to the velvet rope queue and paused beneath the glaring next sign. The teller was pretending she didn't see him, eyes locked on her monitor, fingers still tapping. He cleared his throat. She didn't move. He waited. The seconds stretched out painfully long. Behind him, the guard's boots thumped closer, deliberately heavy. Marlon fought not to turn, not to look over his shoulder and show how rattled he felt. The guard settled in close enough that Marlon could hear the subtle wheeze of the man's breathing. "You lost, friend?" the guard asked with fake politeness, the kind that had barbed wire under every word. Marlon tried for calm, even as his heart punched against his ribs. "No, sir. I'm here for a transaction." The guard let out a small, humorless huff. "Oh yeah? You sure you're in the right place? This is Stonecrest National, not the bus station." Marlon swallowed hard, staring straight ahead. He wasn't going to give them anything. Not the satisfaction. "I know where I am," he said, quiet and even. The guard's radio hissed again, the manager's voice buzzing through. "Copy. Watch him." The guard chuckled low. "Don't worry. I got him." Marlon could feel heat creep up his neck, flush his ears, humiliate him in front of the entire silent lobby. He heard the quiet shift of the suited woman in her chair, the creak of her purse as she pulled it closer to her lap. At the counter, the teller finally sighed theatrically and looked up. Her eyes swept over him, pausing with an unmistakable flicker of distaste at his worn hoodie, at the battered folder he carried. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice thin with impatience. He nodded, holding out the folder slightly. "Yes, I'm here to do a wire transfer. I have the paperwork." Her eyebrows shot up like he'd just offered her something obscene. "A wire transfer," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words on her tongue. "Yes," he said again, voice straining for calm. He felt the guard shift behind him, heard another dry laugh that wasn't even pretending to hide contempt anymore. The teller didn't extend her hand. She just kept staring at him. "ID," she snapped finally. "2 forms." He nodded quickly, fumbling with his old wallet. It caught in the pocket of his jeans, sticking against a frayed inner lining, and he had to tug twice before it came free, the moment stretching out unbearably long. He laid the battered driver's license and bank card on the counter with careful precision, willing his shaking fingers to behave. She picked them up with 2 fingers, like they were sticky. Her eyes flickered from the plastic back to his face, assessing him like she was comparing a mug shot to a wanted poster. Without a word, she set them back on the counter, sliding them far enough that he had to reach to get them. He walked with unhurried precision, his polished shoes clicking across the floor with authority he clearly loved to wield. His gaze flicked to Marlon and tightened, his lips pressing into a line that tried and failed to pass for polite professionalism. Without greeting him, he leaned over the teller station, muttering low enough that Marlon couldn't catch every word, but the intent was clear: assessment, strategy, preparation for something they had already decided would be a problem. Marlon swallowed hard and adjusted in his seat, wincing at the squeak of a chair. He hated how small he felt, how every move seemed to brand him as suspect. Finally, the manager straightened and gestured. "Let's go," he said flatly, not bothering to say Marlon's name. Marlon stood, papers tucked tight under his arm. The guard fell in behind him instantly, boots thumping in time with Marlon's smaller, shuffling steps. As they reached the counter, the teller didn't even try to hide the way her eyes roamed over his clothes, pausing on the torn hem of his jeans, the stain on his hoodie sleeve. She wrinkled her nose just enough to make sure he saw it. The manager folded his hands on the counter, his expression carefully neutral but cold. "What exactly are you trying to do here today?" Marlon cleared his throat, voice scraping out. "I'm here for a wire transfer. I have the documents ready." He began to extend the folder, but the manager didn't take it. Instead, he glanced at the guard, who shifted forward just enough to make the threat clear. The teller spoke up loudly then, her voice slicing the hush like a blade. "Sir, this line is for account holders only." Marlon blinked, stunned for a second. He found his voice small but firm. "I am an account holder. I have ID. My account number is in the paperwork." The teller's lip curled. "We'll need to verify that, obviously." She turned to the manager with a roll of her eyes that made Marlon's ears burn. The manager sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Listen, we can't just process whatever someone drags in off the street. We have protocols." Marlon's heart thudded painfully. "I'm not off the street," he said, voice cracking despite his best effort. "I'm a client. I've done transfers here before." The guard huffed behind him, a low, mocking chuckle. "You got receipts for that, champ?" Marlon turned slightly, meeting the guard's covered eyes. His hands trembled. "I have my ID. I have my documents." He tried to keep his voice from shaking. The manager's eyes narrowed, flicking to the guard and then back to Marlon. "Let me see those," he snapped. Marlon handed the folder over carefully, fighting to keep his fingers steady. The manager didn't open it immediately. Instead, he lifted it like it might be contaminated, glancing at the teller with raised eyebrows before finally cracking it open. He flipped through a couple of pages with the tip of one finger, frown deepening. "This is all hand-printed," he said with open scorn. "Do you expect us to just take your word for this?" Marlon felt the ground tilt under him, heat crawling up his neck. "It's notarized. There's signatures. It's all in order." The teller let out a tiny laugh she didn't bother to hide. "You know how easy it is to forge something like this?" The manager snapped the folder shut and handed it back like it burned. "You're going to need to sit back down. We'll have to call in authorization. You can't expect to walk in here with this and demand we send your wire transfer." The way he said it, dripping with sarcasm, made Marlon's stomach twist. The guard tapped his holster once, a silent threat, and jerked his head toward the chairs. "You heard him. Move." Marlon felt a spark of rage deep in his gut, but it fizzled immediately against a wall of authority, of threat, of certainty that if he argued it would only get worse. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wouldn't give them any reason to say he had. When the manager returned, he gestured curtly with 2 fingers. "Let's try this again," he said, voice dripping with weary condescension. as though Marlon had personally ruined his day by daring to exist. Marlon rose immediately, gripping his folder, forcing himself to keep his posture calm and unthreatening. He walked slowly back to the counter, the guard moving in step behind him like a shadow made of muscle and suspicion. The teller was waiting with her arms crossed, tapping her nails against her sleeve. As Marlon approached, she glanced at the folder in his hands and sighed audibly, rolling her eyes before she spoke. "ID again," she snapped. "And your debit card." Marlon's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet, willing them not to betray the frustration boiling in his chest. He retrieved his worn debit card, the raised numbers dulled from use, and placed it on the counter next to his license. The teller snatched it up between two fingers like it was sticky, turning it back and forth under the harsh fluorescent lights, eyes narrowed as if she expected the plastic to melt and reveal a counterfeit label underneath. She squinted at the back, scraping a nail over the signature strip as if testing whether it would peel away. Marlon watched in silent humiliation, every second stretching out painfully. The manager watched too, arms folded across his chest, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth that he didn't bother hiding. When the teller finally dropped the card back onto the counter, it bounced once and landed at an angle. She didn't bother to slide it toward him. Marlon reached for it carefully, fighting the urge to snatch it up and storm out. His voice felt thick in his throat when he spoke. "Everything's in order," he said quietly. "It's a verified account. My ID is current. The paperwork is notarized. There shouldn't be any issue processing a wire transfer." The manager let out a humorless chuckle, leaning forward on the counter as he pinned Marlon with a look that was all fake sympathy and real disdain. "Look," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a particularly dense child, "we don't cash government checks here." The words fell into the silent lobby like a grenade. Marlon's head jerked up, eyes widening in shock. His lips parted, but for a moment no sound came out. He was aware of the security guard behind him making a low sound of amusement, a half-laugh that ground against Marlon's skull. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the insult, the implication. His voice finally emerged, shaking despite his effort to control it. "I'm not cashing a government check," he said, carefully enunciating each word. "I'm initiating a wire transfer. It's all there. All of it is legitimate. I'm a client here." The manager raised his eyebrows, spreading his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, buddy, I'm just saying what it looks like. You come in here, ink this." His eyes raked over Marlon's clothes, the stained hoodie, the old sneakers. "Flashing around your documents and demanding we send money, who knows where. We have policies. We have to be careful." Marlon felt his face burn, heat flooding his ears as his heart thudded painfully in his chest. He could feel every eye in the lobby on him, the teller's cool disdain, the guard's quiet threat, even the suited woman in the waiting area pretending to look at her phone while she listened to every word. He swallowed hard, trying to force moisture back into his dry mouth. He opened the folder and slid the papers forward across the counter again, pushing past the tremor in his hand. "Please," he said, voice cracking once before he controlled it. "Read it. It's a legal transfer. I have full authorization." The teller scoffed under her breath, shaking her head and glancing at the manager. The manager didn't pick up the papers. He tapped the counter once, sharply. "Enough," he snapped. "Go sit back down. We'll see if we can verify your little story. Until then, don't waste our time." Marlon hesitated, his fingers hovering over the edge of the folder before he finally pulled it back toward himself, the papers inside rustling like dry leaves. He replayed the words over and over like an ugly mantra. "We don't cash government checks here," a lie spat with enough venom to make the others in the lobby avoid his gaze, even the suited woman who pretended to read her phone. The manager was talking to the teller in low, conspiratorial tones, occasionally shooting Marlon a glance over his shoulder as if checking to make sure the dangerous animal hadn't moved. Finally, the manager straightened, adjusted his cuffs with exaggerated care, and walked back toward Marlon, boots tapping an arrogant rhythm on the floor. He stopped in front of Marlon's seat and didn't bother lowering his voice. So he drawled, "You still claiming you're here to send a wire transfer?" Marlon's jaw tightened, and he forced himself to look up, meeting the man's eyes with as much steadiness as he could muster. "Yes," he said, voice rough but clear. "That's exactly what I'm here for. The paperwork is in order. It's notarized. It's a legal transaction." The manager let out a snort of laughter, glancing back at the teller, who smiled coldly in response. "Oh, it's notarized," he repeated mockingly. "Well, I guess that makes it all legitimate then." He leaned closer, hands braced on his knees so his face was level with Marlon's. "Tell me something. You think we don't know what this is? We see people like you all the time, coming in here with your sad little papers, trying to move street money around like it's a real account." Marlon's heart pounded so hard he felt dizzy, the edges of his vision pulsing with it. He shook his head once, sharply. "It's not street money," he said, forcing the words through the tightness in his throat. "It's business funds. I'm acting as the authorized agent for these accounts. I have a right to transfer them." The manager stood upright, crossing his arms over his chest and letting out another laugh, this one loud enough to draw the guard's amused grunt. "Sure you do," he said with theatrical doubt. "Listen to you. Business funds. That's rich." He turned slightly, projecting his voice across the room as if addressing an audience. "Hey, everyone, you hear that? We got ourselves a real big-shot businessman over here. Must be moving millions, right?" The suited woman in the corner pretended to scroll her phone faster, but Marlon saw the way her eyes darted up at them, wide and curious. The teller behind the counter giggled quietly into her palm. Marlon felt his face burn, the humiliation crawling up his neck, making his scalp tingle with shame. He could barely swallow. He opened his mouth to speak again, to try to insist, but the words died when he heard the door at the back of the lobby open with a hiss. A second security guard walked in, stockier than the first, face set in an expression of practiced authority that brooked no argument. He walked straight toward them, his boots slamming the floor like he was stomping out a fire. He came to a stop on Marlon's other side, effectively boxing him in between the two uniformed men. Marlon tried to shift in his seat to look at them both, but the chair was too narrow, forcing him to crane his neck awkwardly. The first guard cracked his knuckles deliberately, watching Marlon's every movement. The second guard spoke first, voice even and flat, but with enough weight behind it to send a clear threat. "Sir," he said, "we're going to need you to cooperate. That means stop causing a scene. If you can't do that, you'll need to leave." Marlon blinked, stunned. "Causing a scene?" he whispered, voice cracking with disbelief. "I'm just trying to finish my transaction. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't done anything." The second guard leaned in closer, so his badge caught the light, drawing Marlon's unwilling attention to the engraved letters of his authority. "You're making our staff uncomfortable," he said, slow and deliberate. "They don't feel safe with you here. So if you want to stay, you sit down, you shut up, and you wait until we decide what to do. Or you leave." Marlon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the manager, who was watching the exchange with the smug satisfaction of a man who'd already decided the ending of this story. His voice cracked like a whip. "All right, let's make this simple," he barked, leaning forward. "Empty your pockets onto the counter. Now, we're going to do a security screening." Marlon blinked, stunned, his head jerking up as confusion and disbelief collided in his chest. He swallowed, mouth bone dry. "What?" he croaked, his voice embarrassingly thin. The manager rolled his eyes, sighing like he was exhausted with the entire performance Marlon was forcing him to endure. "Don't play dumb," he sneered. "You heard me. Empty your pockets. Let's make sure you're not hiding anything." The security guard on Marlon's right took a step closer, close enough that his belt brushed Marlon's shoulder. The other guard mirrored him on the left, blocking any possible escape. Marlon's fingers tightened around the folder until the edges bit deep. His pulse pounded painfully at his temples. He forced his lips apart, voice cracking. "I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to transfer money. This is all I have. My wallet, my documents. I'm not hiding anything." The manager barked a humorless laugh that echoed in the high ceiling. "Sure, you're just a model citizen with a sob story. You want to do business? Prove it. Pockets. Now." Marlon's mouth worked, trying to form words that would make them see sense, but nothing came out. His breath hitched, and he felt the sting behind his eyes. He blinked it back violently, slowly, like a condemned man obeying the final order. He set the folder aside and reached for his pockets. He turned them out one at a time, fishing out lint, a crumpled receipt, his old wallet that split at the seams. He laid them on the counter like offerings at an altar of judgment. The manager didn't touch any of it, just sneered down at the pathetic pile and scoffed. "What a shock," he drawled. "Nothing but trash." Marlon's cheeks burned, the heat crawling into his ears. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, just stood there with his empty pockets hanging inside out like the final mark of his worthlessness. The teller behind the counter watched with wide eyes and a tight smile, her fingers drumming with impatience. She exchanged a glance with the guard, who nodded once, like they had been expecting this outcome all along. Then, with the cruel casualness of someone ordering lunch, she picked up the phone on her station and dialed quickly. Marlon's stomach twisted. He watched her press the receiver to her ear, her voice sugar-sweet and icy at once. "Yes, hello. This is Stonecrest National. I need to make a non-emergency call about a customer. He's being hostile, refusing to comply, possibly high." Marlon's mouth fell open. "What? No, I'm not." The guard pressed a thick hand onto his shoulder, fingers digging in just enough to hurt. "Shut up," he murmured softly, the warning unmistakable. Marlon snapped his mouth shut with a click of teeth, chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. He listened helplessly as the teller described him in calm, professional tones that somehow made it worse, painting him as a threat, a junkie, a dangerous stranger who needed to be removed. "Yes, he's still here," she confirmed, eyes flicking to him with cold satisfaction. "We're concerned for staff safety. Thank you." She set the receiver down with a gentle clack, smoothing her hair back from her face with dainty fingers. The manager sighed heavily. "Congratulations," he muttered, voice dripping with false pity. He heard the click of the teller's keyboard and the soft murmur of her voice as she pretended to work, but her eyes kept flicking over to watch the show. She didn't bother to hide her smirk. When the lobby door swung open with a muted squeal of hinges, a new customer wandered in, a man in business casual slacks and a windbreaker. He paused at the sight of the tableau, Marlon penned in by security, head down like a punished child. The customer's steps faltered, confusion flashing across his face before the teller waved him urgently over with a bright, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, right this way," she chirped, her voice taking on sudden warmth that dripped with condescension. She jerked her head subtly, as if warning him to avoid the infected part of the lobby where Marlon sat. The customer glanced again at Marlon and then quickly looked away, hurrying toward the teller's window, as if afraid he might catch whatever made the staff treat Marlon like a bomb about to go off. Marlon heard the shuffle of his shoes against the tile, the quiet apology in the way the man refused to meet his eyes. Another customer entered minutes later, an older woman with her hair in a tight bun, pearls at her throat. She hesitated even longer, blinking at the two guards who straightened up like statues at her arrival. The manager cleared his throat and called softly to her with faux courtesy, "Right over here, ma'am," gesturing to the other side of the counter, turning his body deliberately to block her line of sight to Marlon. She nodded quickly, lips pressing together as she followed his guidance, clutching her purse tighter to her chest. Marlon felt like a disease they were trying to quarantine. He swallowed hard, the sting in his eyes threatening to spill over as the realization burned deep. They were making sure no one else got too close to the problem he represented. He was something to be managed, a risk to be isolated. The guard nearest to him adjusted his belt with a snap, the heavy utility buckle clicking in warning. The other cracked his knuckles one at a time, the sound dry and deliberate. Marlon flinched and dropped his gaze lower, refusing to rise to the bait. His stomach rolled with nausea and shame. He heard the manager sigh theatrically and then speak in a low voice that wasn't nearly quiet enough, making sure the entire room could hear. He pressed the receiver of his cordless phone to his lips and muttered with gleeful cruelty, "Yes, we still have the vagrant refusing to leave. He's being difficult. Send someone to handle it." The words carved themselves into Marlon's brain, each one leaving a scar he could feel growing deeper. Vagrant, difficult, handle it. The teller's mouth twitched in a smirk she tried to hide behind her hand. The guards didn't even bother. One of them snorted openly, the laugh cold and cruel. The customers kept their eyes firmly locked on their own transactions, determined to pretend they didn't hear, didn't see. Marlon tried to speak. The word please hovered at the back of his throat like a curse he couldn't spit out. He swallowed it instead, feeling it sink into his gut like lead. He couldn't argue. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't explain that he was here to do legitimate business, that he had rights, that he had people counting on him, that he was someone. Every time he tried to take a breath, it hitched on the edge of a sob he refused to let out. The manager shot him another look, cold, satisfied, and turned back to the teller. "Call corporate," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "See if they'll approve anything for our little friend here. Or if we should just let the cops take care of it." The teller giggled under her breath and picked up the phone again, dialing with exaggerated slowness, as if to prove she wasn't worried about him running or fighting back. Around him, the teller kept tapping at her keyboard with performative busyness while still sneaking smirking glances in his direction. The manager continued to hover with arms crossed and a bored expression that radiated cruelty, and the other customers pretended very hard not to notice the dark-skinned man being treated like a criminal in the middle of the lobby. Marlon's fingers trembled once, a violent shudder that ran up to his elbows, before he forced them still. He was done begging. He was done explaining. He had tried everything polite, everything patient, everything calm. He had done nothing wrong. He swallowed once, the lump in his throat cracking as it went down. Then slowly, deliberately, he peeled the folder open on his lap and reached inside. His fingers closed on the battered envelope, the edges creased from travel, the flap softened from being opened and checked over and over again. He lifted it out with exaggerated care so they could see it, the weight of the moment making the air heavy. The guard closest to him noticed first, his stance tightening. "What's that?" he barked. Marlon didn't answer. He didn't even look up. He just kept unsealing the flap and pulling out the paperwork layer by layer. The embossed seals caught the fluorescent light with dull authority. He laid the top document flat across his knees so the manager could see the gold notary stamp. The manager's arms dropped slowly from his chest, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell is that?" he demanded, the false calm in his voice cracking as real worry bled through. Marlon finally raised his head, meeting the man's gaze evenly for the first time since he'd walked in. His voice was hoarse but steady. "This is the notarized authorization for me to transfer $5.9 billion in corporate funds to our competitor bank." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words fell like lead in the hushed lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. The teller's fingers stuttered on the keyboard and she stopped typing completely. The guard closest to Marlon blinked once, mouth opening slightly before snapping shut. The manager's face went slack, then red, then pale in a single heartbeat. Marlon let the silence hang for a long moment, let them choke on it the way he'd choked on their insults all morning. Then he moved again, slower this time, deliberate and calm like he was conducting a lesson in front of children. He set the envelope back in the folder and reached into his jeans pocket, pulling out his old phone. The cracked case made it hard to slide his thumb across the screen, but he did it anyway. He didn't even look at the guards, didn't ask permission. He just unlocked it, scrolled to the contact he needed, and pressed the call button. The ringing was loud in the silent lobby. The manager took a step forward, blustering. "Hey, put that away right now, you can't." Marlon raised one hand, palm out, shutting him up like a teacher scolding a loud student. The manager froze, mouth hanging open. The phone clicked. Marlon pressed the speaker button with his thumb. A crisp professional voice came through immediately. "Mr. Tate, are you ready?" Marlon's voice shook at the edges but stayed firm. "Yes. Initiate the full withdrawal order immediately." The lawyer didn't hesitate. "Understood. I have the authorization. Funds will be pulled from all accounts in this branch and all connected branches today. Transfers to competitor banks begin now." The manager's eyes went wide as dinner plates. The color drained from his face entirely. The teller's mouth dropped open, and she actually stood from her seat, her chair rolling back with a screech against the tile. The guards exchanged a glance that was no longer confident or mocking, but confused, scared even. The lawyer's voice stayed crisp and merciless. "Is there anything else you want them to know, sir?" Marlon's lips trembled. He swallowed, taking in the ruined faces around him, the deathly silence that had fallen over the entire bank. The fear, the realization. He let them stew in it for just a heartbeat longer before he spoke again, voice low, resonant, controlled. Marlon drew in a slow breath and let it out, feeling some of the tightness in his chest ease even though his heart was still hammering from adrenaline. He hadn't planned to make a scene like this. He hadn't wanted to do it here, in front of these strangers, with their smug faces and dismissive tones turned to panic and dread. But they had forced this moment, forced him to play every card he had, forced him to show them what their contempt had cost them. He lifted his eyes to the manager and spoke in a voice that was calm and even, but sharp enough to cut. "Call your regional director," he said. "You're going to need him." The manager swallowed visibly, Adam's apple bobbing, before fumbling in his pocket for his own phone. Marlon didn't look away, didn't give him the dignity of pretending not to see his shaking fingers. While the manager turned away to make his hushed, frantic call, Marlon unlocked his own phone again and found the saved number at the top of his screen. He tapped it once and waited. It rang only once before the lawyer picked up. "Mr. Tate," the attorney's voice was steady, professional, but there was a faint edge of satisfaction under it now. "We're moving forward." Marlon didn't bother lowering his voice. He wanted every single person in that room to hear him. Execute the withdrawal instructions from this branch and all affiliated branches. Effective now. The words were precise, deliberate, each one landing like a hammer blow on the tile floor. The guard stiffened at the sound of his command, glancing at the manager, who was still turned away in desperate conversation, but clearly listening, his shoulders hunching in defeat. The teller's fingers twitched on the desk, her face pale. On the other end of the line, the lawyer's voice was perfectly calm. "Understood. Transfers are already processing. The competitor banks have confirmed receipt of the initial transfers, and they are prepared for the full balance as it clears." Marlon exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate, letting the tension bleed out of his shoulders as he forced himself to stay composed. His voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. "And the press." The lawyer didn't miss a beat. "Already notified, sir. We included a copy of the complaint, the video evidence, and the details of the transaction. Local affiliates are picking it up now. Expect questions soon." Marlon's jaw tightened at that. He hadn't wanted it to go that far, hadn't wanted to make this an ugly public scandal. But they had chosen that path the moment they humiliated him for daring to sit in their lobby and do business like anyone else. He felt a distant flicker of regret, but it died fast. He looked at the guards, who had shifted back another step, trying to look busy, but glancing at the door like they were half ready to bolt. He shifted his gaze to the teller, who was blinking fast, her face turning blotchy with shame or fear or both. Finally, he turned his eyes on the manager, who ended his call and turned back around with a face gone gray and slack. Marlon let the phone rest on his thigh, the lawyer still on the line. He didn't have to say anything. The message was clear. The manager cleared his throat once, twice, failing to dislodge the panic in his voice. "Mr. Tate," he started, faltering. Let's not be hasty. There must be a way to resolve this without," he trailed off, glancing at the teller for help. But she had nothing. Marlon didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, perfectly controlled. "You had your chance," he said. The manager remained standing 10 feet away, shoulders hunched, pale and sweating as he kept glancing at the lobby doors like he wanted to bolt, but couldn't figure out how to do it without making it worse. Then the doors burst open so hard they banged against the stops. A man in an expensive tailored suit strode in, face red with fury, phone clamped to his ear while he yelled into it with all the calm of a man trying not to have a heart attack on the floor. His voice boomed through the lobby, unignorable. I don't care if they're on hold. You get corporate compliance on the line now, or I'll fire every single one of you incompetent idiots." The teller flinched at the volume and shrank back on her stool. The guard straightened to attention, hands at their belts as though they might have to salute. The manager tried to intercept the newcomer, voice cracking. Sir, please, I can explain." The VP didn't even look at him. He finished his call with a furious bark. "Do it now." Then stabbed the hang-up button so hard the screen cracked. He turned on the manager with eyes so cold Marlon felt the chill from his seat. "Explain," the VP sneered, voice ice. "Explain what? That you managed to insult and threaten the representative for almost $6 billion in high-value corporate accounts? That you humiliated him in front of your entire staff and customers? That you treated him like a criminal in an empty lobby while you called security to block his path and your teller laughed in his face?" The manager's mouth worked, but no words came out, just a strangled squeak. The VP stepped closer, looming over him, suit straining across broad shoulders. "Do you have any idea how fast the transfer orders hit our system? Corporates screaming at me that the competitor banks already processing the full portfolio. $6 billion evaporating in real time because you couldn't keep your mouth shut and do your damn job." He pointed one trembling finger at the teller. "You think you're so clever with your little jokes? Your manager here thinks he's protecting the bank? You just cost us more in one day than you'll earn in 50 lifetimes." The teller let out a wet, gasping sob and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking as her carefully arranged hair fell in messy strands around her fingers. The manager tried again, voice cracking, desperate. We didn't know who he was." The VP's laugh was brittle and sharp as broken glass. "That's the point," he screamed so loud the sound bounced off the marble walls. "You didn't bother to ask. You judged him the second he walked in the door, wearing clothes you thought weren't good enough for your precious lobby. You humiliated him. You threatened to have him arrested. You didn't even try to treat him like a customer." He sucked in a harsh breath, turning away as though he couldn't bear to look at them anymore, hand pressed to his forehead. "The board wants your resignations. Both of you. Immediately. HR is waiting upstairs. Clean out your desks today." The manager let out a choking sound like someone drowning, his hands shaking so badly the cheap plastic ID badge on his lanyard rattled. The teller was sobbing openly now, tears leaving black tracks of mascara on her cheeks. The VP turned toward Marlon, who watched all of this with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met. For a moment, the VP's lips trembled as though he might say something more, but he only swallowed and looked away, ashamed to hold Marlon's gaze. Outside, the squeal of brakes and the hum of an engine announced the arrival of the first local news van. Through the glass doors, Marlon saw the camera crew hustling to set up, a reporter already speaking into a microphone with that hungry gleam in her eye. His phone buzzed once on his lap. He glanced down to see a news alert lighting up the cracked screen. Local bank accused of racist harassment loses $5.9 billion in accounts. Marlon watched from his chair in the lobby as the regional VP finished yelling and turned away, disgusted and exhausted. The once powerful manager now slumped like a puppet with its strings cut, while the teller sobbed into shaking hands. The guards who had glared at him so confidently earlier stood awkwardly near the door, looking everywhere, but at Marlon, no longer sure of their role, no longer able to play the part of enforcers. The news vans were clustered at the curb, lights flashing, microphones being tested as the camera crews adjusted focus on the bank's polished logo above the entrance. Reporters practiced their grave voices, ready to deliver the story to the whole city, maybe the whole country, and Marlon felt the weight of that moment press down on him. But this time, it didn't suffocate him. Instead, it steadied him, forced him to breathe deep and see just how big this was, how far it would spread. The damage was done. The withdrawals had been processed, the competitor banks welcoming the billions the old bank had taken for granted, and the headlines were already spreading like wildfire. The image of him sitting quietly while the guards boxed him in was everywhere, a symbol no one could spin or deny. Days later, the aftermath took on its own life. The bank's corporate headquarters released a statement acknowledging the loss, their stock price tumbling further with each trading session as investors lost faith in an institution so deeply careless about its own customers. But they hadn't just lost money. They lost reputation, trust, the illusion of being a welcoming place for everyone. A week after the incident, in the basement of a community center not far from the bank's branch, the former manager sat in a hard folding chair, shoulders slumped forward, eyes bloodshot. Around him were the two security guards and the teller, all required to attend mandatory anti-bias training sessions as part of a settlement to avoid further legal exposure. The room smelled of old coffee and industrial cleaning fluid. The speaker at the front, a middle-aged black woman with a steady, no-nonsense voice, didn't raise it to yell, but made every word feel like it landed right in their chests. She described what implicit bias looked like, how it made its home in casual jokes and so-called harmless policies, how it turned banks into traps for people who only wanted what everyone else was promised. She spoke about humanity, about respect, about the cost of cruelty. The former manager tried to keep his expression hard, but it cracked when the speaker talked about dignity, about what it meant to rob someone of the right to be seen as a person. His mouth twisted, his eyes filled. His hand came up to wipe them, but not fast enough to hide the tears from the small group watching. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, looking away, shame creeping up his neck in a splotchy red wave. The teller didn't speak at all that day. She only listened, her fingers twisting in her lap so tight they went white. They would never undo what they did, but they were made to face it, to sit with it, to know it. Elsewhere, in the main branch's once busy conference room, the new CEO, brought in to restore the bank's reputation, stood at a podium facing a packed room of reporters, executives, and employees. She wore a navy suit with a simple pearl pin at the collar, her expression grave but determined. Beside her stood Marlon, in a freshly laundered but still simple shirt and slacks, no tie, no fancy watch, just himself. She cleared her throat and began, not with the usual corporate deflection, but with an apology that sounded like she meant it. She named Marlon directly, apologized to him personally, and then turned to the cameras and apologized to every person who had ever walked into one of their branches and been treated as less than human. She admitted failure. She promised change. She outlined a new equity and inclusion initiative with mandatory training for all employees, new hiring practices, transparent oversight, and above all a cultural reset designed to make sure what happened to Marlon could never happen again. And when she finished, she gestured to him. Marlon didn't want to give a speech. He wasn't there to be a hero or to make anyone comfortable. But he did speak, voice low but steady, about what it felt like to be seen as a threat for no reason, about the quiet humiliations that added up to something soul-crushing, about the people who didn't have the resources he had to fight back. He reminded them all that the money that left was only part of what they lost that day. Trust was harder to regain. When he finished, the CEO nodded solemnly and announced that Marlon would lead the bank's new advisory board on equity and inclusion, empowered to hold them accountable for real change. The cameras flashed, the reporters scribbled, but Marlon kept his gaze steady, his spine straight, his hands clasped in front of him. He didn't smile. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to make sure they remembered exactly why this had to happen. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it and subscribe so you won't miss future installments that dive deep into real, human themes like this one. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot. Was it powerful? Surprising? Satisfying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel and who they resonate with around the world. Let's keep the conversation going.